What happened yesterday, I mean, we don't know exactly, but probably during the 10 minutes one-to-one in the car, in the Beast, they had a private conversation. We don't know what they said. And then during about 2.5 hours or 3 hours, the two delegations were discussing together. So it's a very limited period of time. And during this limited period of time, Vladimir Putin managed to change completely the mindset of President Trump. President Trump has been saying for months that what he wanted was a ceasefire, just a ceasefire, without any condition. And he finally convinced the Europeans to be on the same position, asking for a ceasefire without any condition. And even Zelensky was also the same. And of course, what Putin has done is to explain with rational arguments that it was not a good idea, because this ceasefire would not be respected except if you have all a monitoring force for this ceasefire, which was not at all mentioned, because in fact, the President of the United States had in mind was a political ceasefire without taking care of the details of what was happening on the front line, which is a very long front line because it's 1,200 kilometers, so it's huge. And probably he managed to convince President Trump that it was not a good idea. It would create many problems because ceasefire would be breached every day by one way or another. And he said, why don't we go directly to negotiate the peace treaty? But it's completely different because a peace treaty is another matter. And a peace treaty, of course, it gives time to Putin. Putin wanted to buy time anyway. He managed to buy time against sanctions, as you mentioned, by receiving Witkoff, the special envoy of President Trump. Then by having this summit in Alaska, in Alaska yesterday. And now by saying, well, be reasonable, we have to negotiate directly a peace treaty, it would be safer, which means that this negotiation will be a huge negotiation, which will take many months. And during that time, the fight will be going on. And the cities, civilian people will die, of course. So, I mean, I'm a little bit surprised that Donald Trump accepted so easily this rational argument, but what he wanted to say back to the United States is, I get a ceasefire, and then people won't be killed anymore for a certain period of time, during which the negotiation will start for the peace treaty. And then the second thing is that if we are going straight to a peace treaty, that means that the different elements of a peace treaty will be permanent element, which means on the territorial aspects, it will not be for a certain period of time that the piece of land occupied by Russia will be occupied by Russia. It's forever.
Yeah,
because it will become the international law, and of course it's completely unacceptable for any Ukrainian leader, not only for Zelensky, but for any other Ukrainian leader. So that's creating a real difficulty. And third, being a completely different scope, I mean, it cannot be done, this peace treaty, by a negotiation between Russia and the US. It has to be another format, including the European, maybe including all the permanent members of the Security Council, including China, who has shown interest in that. It's a completely different scope. So the question today is how to establish a peace conference on Ukraine, where and with whom taking part in it. A completely different matter.
And I mean, it also begs the question of the fact that neither Russia nor Ukraine's non-negotiables, in order for there to be peace, have changed. Russia wants the so-called root causes to be addressed. Ukraine wants its territorial integrity to be respected. It has said time and time again, Volodymyr Zelensky has said time and time again that Ukraine will not give up any of its territory and that is a part of its constitution. So to the extent that neither of those non-negotiables are changing or have been addressed, is even negotiating a peace treaty realistic at this stage in the war?
Of course, because we are going to in a deadlock, in fact, because, as you said, of course, the Ukrainian could agree at a certain stage to have a provisional agreement on territorial issues. But it's to be a permanent agreement with force of international law, then they cannot accept anything but sovereignty of Ukraine and territorial integrity. I mean, for instance, we never had a peace treaty between North Korea and South Korea. It's just a ceasefire treaty. It's a ceasefire agreement, but no peace treaty. No peace treaty also between Russia and Japan about the islands which are occupied by Russia. And if you want to have a peace treaty, it's another matter. It will take months, maybe years.
You mentioned the importance of the Europeans being involved, but we have seen a bit of discord amongst EU members since the start of this war, really. And then today we had a joint statement from a select few leaders condemning Russia, saying that it cannot veto Ukrainian membership, neither in the EU nor NATO. All of this while individual member states have a different perspective. We heard Hungary say that the world is a safer place after that Trump-Putin summit. We heard Italy's Meloni saying that it, for the first time, essentially brought a glimmer of hope for peace talks. Is there a coherent, unified European strategy to speak of at this point?
I mean, of course, we are starting with different position within inside the European Union, and especially when we come to the security guarantee to be given to Ukraine. In fact, there was a sort of opening in the speech of Putin, saying, "Well, we are not against any security guarantee given to Ukraine," but before saying that, he has said we must deal with the roots of the conflict, and for him, the root of the conflict is the presence of quasi-Nazi in the government of Ukraine, and he mentioned by that he wants the removal of the current president of Ukraine, and of course, I mean, he can accept. My assumption is that Putin can accept security guarantee to Ukraine, provided that the government of Ukraine has changed and he had a more friendly government towards Russia. Then he can accept guarantee, but otherwise he won't accept guarantee. So we are very far away from any kind of agreement towards a peace treaty.
Aside from the question of discord amongst European Union members, to put it frankly, a lot of what we hear coming today sounds almost like it's based on illusions, frankly, rather than reality. There's talk of organizing a trilateral summit, which, of course, the Kremlin has said we're nowhere near meeting its conditions in any case for such a summit to be organized. There's claims that we've never been closer to peace in Ukraine, while, as we've said earlier, neither of their non-negotiables have changed. And then there's thanks to Donald Trump for his openness to security guarantees for Ukraine, which do not address the very points that you just made there, is that, of course, for Vladimir Putin, that depends on what government is in place in Ukraine, and that depends on some of these other things that European leaders have failed to address. So why seemingly so much denial from individual European member states?
Well, we have to see what will be the outcome of the bilateral meeting between President Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday, which will be very important and probably very difficult meeting. And probably Donald Trump will try to press on Zelensky so that he can accept some of the Russian conditions. He won't accept them, and therefore, if he won't accept them, I doubt very much about the trilateral summit between Putin, Trump, and Zelensky, because Putin will agree to meet Zelensky only if Zelensky has accepted most of his conditions. Otherwise, he won't accept to have a trilateral meeting with him. He will say there's no point to do that because Zelensky is an extremist. And in a way, there is a kind of agreement between Trump and Putin to accuse Zelensky to be responsible for the continuation of the war.
And again, that discourse, I mean, there was a period of time, at least 2 or 3 weeks ago, where that discourse was totally the opposite from the Trump administration, where the Trump administration had suggested for once that the ball was in Vladimir Putin's court, that he could end the war, and that if he didn't end the war in between 10 to 12 days, that Donald Trump would impose further crippling sanctions on Russia. How do you explain such a radical change over just 2 weeks?
That's another point on which Vladimir Putin has won yesterday, because there is no question of putting more sanctions from the American administration. Maybe Donald Trump will have some problem with the Congress when the Congress will resume in a month's time or so, because in Congress some people, including Republicans, would like to put sanctions on Vladimir Putin, and if the fact that we will be in a new framework, which is the trying to establish a conference to negotiate a peace treaty. I mean, we can negotiate a peace treaty with sanctions against Russia to put pressure on Russia, because without pressure on Russia, there will be no peace treaty, never, ever. So I think this, and the Europeans will probably decide after 18th sanctions packet, they will decide a 19th bunch of sanctions against Russia, to put sanction, of course, and to put pressure, especially to try to dry the financial resources of the budget of Russia through export of oil and gas.
The numbers, I think, speak for themselves. You say this is going to be potentially a 19th round of sanctions, which suggests that over the past 3.5 years, 18 rounds of sanctions have not really done much to discourage Vladimir Putin from pursuing the war. So my question to you is, and this is unfortunately the last one that we have time for, but my question to you is, do you think that there is more that the European Union could have done up until now in an efficient way to produce a more efficient diplomatic response to what we see happening?
Well, of course, they could have done more by giving more armaments to Ukraine. But I mean, they don't have unlimited resources in armament. They don't have stocks, for instance, in ammunitions. The Americans have. We don't have, because everything has been rationalized in the managing of our armies, and therefore we were limited to what we can give to Ukraine. And some of our partners anyway are buying most of their armament to the U.S. And therefore there is a scheme through which there would be a kind of European Union financing to buy armaments to the U.S. to give it to Ukraine. But there again, I mean, the U.S., if it's U.S. armaments, will keep the reservation for the use of this armament. So it's not a complete solution, but it's a way to make progress. But there again, I think this morning we have a new situation. We are not seeking a short-term and for a limited period of time ceasefire. We are going through a peace conference, and the peace conference should take place, I don't know where, maybe in Geneva, maybe elsewhere, and with many other participants who have a genuine interest in this war.
Former Ambassador Claude Blanchemaison, there's so much more to say. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.